I volunteered to, since our quarterly meeting at Seaville got kind of postponed until they're ready to handle this. I offered to do a little presentation on what's behind the violence in Israel and Gaza. Uh, it's there's a lot more. It's a lot more complicated than that. There are many stories, many reasons, and it's a hard story to tell. But it's well, I'll give it a shot. So I want to just go over a couple of definitions, since it seems that not everybody knows, from listening to the U.S. media, what's actually what is what. So you hear terms like a Zionist. What's a Zionist? A Zionist is a person who believes in the development and protection of a Jewish nation in what is now Israel. It has nothing to do with being anti-Semitic, which is a completely different and not a great thing. So being a Zionist or an anti-Zionist does not mean that you're anti-Semitic. It just means that you're not a fan of the expansive area that Israel has taken over in that whole area. The Palestinian Authority is the organization that oversees part of the West Bank. It has an elected council, and the president of the Palestinian Authority is a member of Fatah, which is formerly the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is, you might remember, Yasser Arafat and that group. But it's a multi-party organization now, and Fatah is the second largest party in that legislative council. The president is a member of Fatah. It's also active in control of Palestinian refugee camps, which we'll see in a little while. Hamas is a Sunni Islamic fundamentalist group. They're more militant, and they're a nationalist organization. They have a social service wing, a military wing. It won the 2006 Palestinian legislative election and became the governing authority of the Gaza Strip, and it also holds a majority in the parliament of the Palestinian National Authority. We'll talk some more about how that informs things like elections. So let's look at the geography. This is the West Bank. You see, it's part of Israel. You can see the Gaza Strip over here on the left, and in the center of it, you see Ramallah, Jericho, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Hebron, which is the second largest city after Jerusalem in the West Bank. Now, let's overlay that with the Israeli settlements that are in the West Bank. All these little blue dots are settlements that have sprung up around. The orange areas here that you see are areas that are restricted or inaccessible to Palestinians. So they're generally, in many cases, the separation wall separates some of these areas from the rest of the West Bank. So it's, you also see on this slide on the left, you see where Tel Aviv is, and of course above that, which is not shown, are the Golan Heights and that whole area. The dotted line here is the international boundary between Israel and Jordan. So there's a lot of varying histories, dueling, I call them the dueling histories over historic Palestine. And I saw this Jimmy Buffett quote: "Without geography, you're nowhere," and that certainly applies here. So in the early times, and there's an pro-Israel version and a pro-Palestinian version. In the pro-Israel version, Palestine was a place name that the Romans used, but then it disappeared. There was no Palestine before the British Mandate, which we'll talk about a little bit, that was established after World War I. And before then, that area was known as a variety of administrative areas in the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, that basically ruled a whole lot of the Middle East for quite a while. The pro-Palestinian version, the 5th century BC, they described this multi-faith country that was between Phoenicia and Egypt, and it was called Palestine. So 1917 British Mandate is after the Ottoman Empire collapsed, all the European powers just carved up the Middle East amongst themselves. So the British Mandate was established to create a Jewish national home, and the British chose the name Palestine, reflecting, quote, Christian European thinking, not any Ottoman designation. The original mandate for a Jewish homeland included what was now Jordan, but that was split off in 1921 and became an independent country. The Palestinian version, in the late 1800s, the Palestinian national consciousness emerged in response to the arrival of Zionists. The Palestinians looked at Zionists as being white colonialists, even though the Jewish population in the region was much smaller, just 8% or so, when the British Mandate was established. So when the mandate entered 1948, and the UN came up with a plan to divide this area into the area known as Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Israel version says many Arabs abandoned their homes at the urging of Arab leaders. Israel ended up with more land than would have been under the partition plan. That's pretty hysterical, actually, because what happened was, again, the Palestinian version, the time in 1948, they would have been given 56% of the former mandate. So the Palestinians saw no reason to really accept that deal. So when the state of Israel was declared, Jewish forces forced many Palestinian families from their homes. This is called the Nakba, or the catastrophe, is what Palestinians call it. Although Israel would like to think that everybody left because they were told to by their Arab leaders, the Israeli Defense Forces also say that 70% of the Arabs during the time were expelled by military operations carried out by Jewish forces, and 5% were orders from Arab leaders to go. So this was a huge displacement of people that is still an issue today. So the settlements on the West Bank, there's over 126 of them now, and there's also little outposts and that sort of thing. And according, again, the organization that represents the settlements said there's about 420,000 settlers in the West Bank. The opponents of settlements see it as part of Israel's strategy to take over the West Bank permanently. The settlements make it really impossible for the Palestinians to really ever have an independent nation. There's no contiguous area of the West Bank that could be a two-state part of the so-called two-state solution. The settlements have long been a long Israeli, or a long stumbling block for a peace deal. And we were talking earlier about the movie Oslo, the 1993 Oslo Accords. The issue of settlements was so thorny that they decided to put it off and deal with it later, which of course they really never have. So Jerusalem, again, tinderbox that it is, in '67, Israel expanded the boundaries to take over East Jerusalem, which the Palestinians always saw as their capital. So the only, there's a few countries that have recognized that, the U.S. being one, and moved their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. As you see, there's about 200,000 Israelis in East Jerusalem, and many people consider them to be settlers. And there's about 300,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and it's not a very large area. So, you look at a picture of it, that's East Jerusalem. The dome in the background is the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But you can see most of this is settlements. There are some Palestinian homes here. You can tell the difference because the Palestinian homes have black water tanks on their roof to store water, because their water can be cut off, and it is cut off fairly regularly. The Jewish settlements don't have those on the top because they have all the water they can use, and they have swimming pools and so forth. So, but you can see it's very densely populated area. And this is the old city, the walled old city of East Jerusalem. This is where when I went there in 2017, we stayed somewhere between the Christian quarter and the Muslim quarter. There's while this really it's divided into quarters, you wouldn't know it. You just travel around and you have no idea which quarter you're in until you get to the Jewish quarter, in which case you have to go through a checkpoint to get there, which is it's sort of like TSA at the airport. Take everything out of your pockets and get scanned and so forth. If you're Arab or Muslim, you can't enter the Jewish quarter, and you'll probably be arrested and detained if you try to go through the checkpoint. This Via Doloroso you see above this green area, this is known as the Stations of the Cross. This is a pilgrimage site. Various places are marked as part of the Stations of the Cross. It leads down to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where it includes a marble slab where Jesus' body was washed and prepared for burial, and Jesus' empty tomb. This church was built in about 325 and has undergone repairs and rebuilding through the years. The Damascus Gate, which you see up at the top, is one of the main entrances to this whole area. We went through the Damascus Gate everywhere we went, and they stayed in this area. The Jewish quarter has the western wall, or the Wailing Wall. This is called the western wall of the temple. We'll look at that a little bit further. This is the Damascus Gate. And it's as I say, the entrance to the old city that comes from the bus station. It's a big open air market and a lot of homes and people living in apartments and so forth. there's lots of families, selling various produce. There's shops all through the old city. This is, for example, what the old city looks like on the ground. A little restaurant out in the middle of the road, or the street here. Shops and so forth. This is all in the pretty much in the Muslim quarter. I think it's hard, like I say, it's hard to tell. It's just sort of seamless. This is the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall. It's the wall of the original Jewish temple. It's actually is part of the expansion of the second Jewish temple that was started by Herod the Great, the infamous Herod the Great. So it's at the bottom of the steep hill that's known as the Jews and Christians as the Temple Mount, and it's also in various Muslim traditions. It's the site where Muhammad tied his winged steed before he ascended to heaven. The man with the black bag is handing out yarmulkes. Everyone who comes into the Western Wall must wear a yarmulke, regardless of your religion or not. Doesn't matter. You have to wear it or you're not allowed. So this is the so-called the Dome of the Rock, and the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is right here in the foreground. This is sacred to two Abrahamic religions. The rock is where God told Abraham to kill his son Isaac, and then told him to stop and kill a sheep instead. So that's very very significant to Christians, at least. The rock is also where Muhammad rose to heaven. So it is very sacred to Muslim religion as well. So it's an age-old conflict. It's a place that's holy to two Abrahamic religions, and it's overseen by a group from Jordan that oversees this whole Temple Mount area. So it's not under the control of Israel or Palestinians. It's under the control of Jordan, which actually makes it work better. So let's talk a little bit about the occupation of the West Bank. And it is called an occupation because it is a military occupation by Israel. So the Palestinians are living under armed occupation. Their soldiers strolling around with their weapons and looking around at, watching people and stopping them, and anything that anything they want to do, they do. We've had a couple of situations where we come out of a restaurant to go back to our hostel and couldn't get there because there was a block. They had part of the street blocked for some reason or another, so we had to wind our way all the way around some other way to get there. There are severe restrictions on movement, especially between Palestinian and Israeli-controlled areas. So to get from East Jerusalem or from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, for example, we took a regular public bus. It had to stop at the checkpoint, and all the Palestinians had to get off. So we all got off with them, and they said, no, you don't have to get off. They get off, we get off. And they looked at everybody's papers and made sure that everybody was okay as far as they were concerned. And then we all got up back on the bus and left again. But that's how you get from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. So building anything in the West Bank by Palestinians requires building permits, which I think the percentage of building permits that are granted is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1% of people who apply. So anything without a permit can be just demolished at any time, no matter when they were built. And if they're demolished, you have a choice. You can demolish it, or the military government can demolish it. And if they do, they charge you, huge amounts of money for tearing down your home. So this, for example, is an apartment building that was built. This is outside of Ramallah, for example, but this was an apartment building. That's what it looked like, and that's what it looks like now, because there's a settlement over in this little area with the red roof. That's a settlement or an outpost, and so it was too close to that, and so it was basically they bring big bulldozers and backhoes in and they destroy it. And this happens all throughout the West Bank. Also under occupation, this headline is very recent. They had, after the exchange of fire with Hamas and Gaza, Israel started detaining Palestinian citizens in the West Bank. They've arrested about, I think this is about 2 weeks ago, they had arrested 1,700 Palestinian citizens. They call it law and order, although I'm not sure why. However, you can't look at what the military is doing in the West Bank and think that all Israelis feel that way. There are a number of Israeli peace organizations that document and protest the armed occupation. And these are Israelis who are working and campaigning for peace. They intervene with arrests like that. This photograph is probably taken by one of those groups. They're on the ground. They're documenting. They're writing. They're telling stories, and it's again there are Palestinian and Israeli peace organizations that are involved in this, but a surprising number of them are Israeli. This is how many soldiers does it take to arrest a teenager? Apparently quite a few. So this kid is probably, the standard charge is you were throwing rocks. So that's part of what's happening here. They're coming through checkpoints, kids going to school. This kid's got to show that he's not wearing a suicide vest. And I'm not sure on the right, I'm not sure what this kid was doing, but they, again, it takes 3 of them to take this little kid into custody. So these are daily kind of occurrences. It was interesting watching Palestinians going through a checkpoint. The older 20 something Palestinians, when they walk on the checkpoint, they take their belt off because they know they're going to be strip searched. So that's just a fact of life. And going to school, kids get stopped at a checkpoint on their way to school and waiting for this guy to decide to open the turnstile and let them through. On the first day of school, as kids are all these kids are going back to school carrying their old backpacks and everything, every kid was stopped and their backpack was searched. So kids were 3 and 4 hours late getting to school because they had to look at every one of them. So that was pretty crazy. So this here's an example of now we're down in Hebron. This is an open air market in Hebron. We made we were here often buying, groceries for dinner and that sort of thing. And it's a very great, really great place to be. And, but occasionally you run across what's known as a flying checkpoint. Here, these two are part of, and the person taking the picture is part of our delegation. They were off on a lunch break, and they got blocked by what's called a flying checkpoint. They were trying to arrest or find 3 boys who were supposedly throwing rocks. They arrested 2 of them. They're looking to find the rest of them. So they were stuck. They couldn't get anywhere. They went one direction, ran into these guys, went in the other direction, ran into other guys that looked like that. And so they called us at the Christian Peacemaker team place where we were staying, and a couple of them came out and found their way through one of the tunnels, and we were able to get all of them back. But they were stuck just like all these, like this kid taking dinner home. So what happened that triggered all this latest round of violence? How did this escalate into rockets and airstrikes? I think is that you know from the news that there's been a lot of clashes and demonstrations in Jerusalem. So on May 10th, during Ramadan, Palestinians who were at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as being Ramadan being the holy days of Islam, and they were, a bunch of them were injured, and they had police and settlers raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is, that has not happened. So it was 2 days before the end of Ramadan. And then there's also something called Jerusalem Day, which is a big flag raising march by mostly settlers through the neighborhoods that would have also corresponded with the end of Ramadan. So that was pretty crazy. It was going to include going through the Damascus Gate, going through the Muslim quarter, and they've been clashing, especially in Ramadan or in the Damascus Gate area. That's where everybody comes out after sunset for the feast. This how it escalated in rocket attacks. Really, Hamas saw what was going on, saw that nothing was happening here, and decided that they'd respond. So they started firing rockets towards Jerusalem. Rockets are unguided. They just, you saw, I'm sure you saw lots of videos of that. All of them, or almost all of them, are intercepted by what's something called the Iron Dome, which is a anti-missile thing that intercepts these rockets. So Israel decided that Israel fired back, and this whole thing went crazy. So they really have started. They've struck hundreds of targets in Gaza. Gaza is not that big, and most of the population lives in the northern end of Gaza. So it's not Israel doesn't just randomly run up and just bomb everything. They have a term they call roof knocking, where they drop a low yield explosive device on a roof of a targeted home or apartment building, and it gives the residents about 10-minute warning to get out. So they basically get out and go through the shelters, and then Israeli Air Force will bomb it and level it. So some of the scenes that have been seen, some of the scenes of Gaza after the exchange of rockets and bombs is just incredible. It's incredible damage. And again, lots of people killed and injured and so forth. So that's so the where am I? The Jerusalem Day, there was an update. They decided that they would not have, that they'd cancel that event after the police said they would not allow the flag march to pass through the Old City's Muslim quarter. So they just decided to cancel it. Oh, second update. Outgoing Prime Minister Netanyahu announced the march will go on through the Muslim quarter Old City and pass through the Damascus Gate. So that's that. I don't know what happened now that he's out of power. I mean, as of today or yesterday, he's out of power. So that's pretty crazy. The Iron Dome, by the way, was funded by the U.S. Developed by Israeli armament industries, and but our tax dollars paid for that, and continues to pay for that. I think we gave them another $250 million to replenish their Iron Dome system. So let's look at, what about elections? Palestinian elections or not. For Palestinians, the president of the Palestinian Authority is 85 years old. He was elected in elections. I think the first Palestinian elections were to be held, the first ones in 15 years. They haven't had elections in about 15 years. So in theory, these elections were going to take place in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. And of course, Abbas is at odds with Hamas, who rules in Gaza, and Israel barred the Palestinian Authority from operating East Jerusalem. So, and that's where the most Palestinians live who aren't Israeli citizens. So Abbas, said, "Hey, East Jerusalem has to vote," and blamed Israel for canceling the election. So they have canceled the election against. So that was a real blow to Palestinians who were anxious to have an election. However, I think the real reason that he canceled the election is because Hamas would have won and he would have been out of power. So that's kind of the elections or not. So at this point, Palestinians haven't had an election for 15 years. They're not going to have one this year either. So looking at life under occupation, some of these pictures, or most of these pictures, are from our trip in 2017. Although they still apply today. Everything is still there. So we visited this refugee camp just outside of Bethlehem. It's a UN refugee camp. The key that you see on the overpass here represents the Palestinians' right of return. There is still, although it's never going to happen, you see keys everywhere hanging on a door or whatever, and they're the keys to their homes in Jerusalem or in Israel that were after they were kicked out of in 1948. So this kind of a in your face, we're coming back kind of thing. Although that's obviously never going to happen. Alongside of the road that we're on is the separation wall. This is the wall that separates Israelis on the other side, settlers on the other side, from this refugee camp. This guard tower is manned, although it doesn't look like it. It is. And you can see the graffiti that the residents have put on it. So there's a little video here. We visited a center for primarily to get kids out off the street and into some kind of structured environment. And there's not many places for kids to be, but this is one safe place that they can be. So I want to show you just a little video of
تعلمنا بالمدرسة عن حقوق الطفل كثير، بس كثير من هاي الحقوق ما بتطبق. من أهمها الحق في الحماية والأمان. في مادة 42 للطفل الحق في الحماية من أشكال العنف أو الإساءة البدنية أو المعنوية أو الجنسية أو الإهمال أو التقصير أو التشرد أو غير ذلك من أشكال إساءة المعاملة أو الاستغلال. مخيم عايدة موجود في مدينة بيت لحم. وكالة الغوث أسست المخيم في سنة 1950. الناس الساكنة بالمخيم أجوا من 27 قرية، واليوم بسكن المخيم حوالي 5500 مواطن. بحيط المخيم جدار الفصل العنصري وتقريبا أكثر من 6 أبراج حوالين المخيم. كثير أحيانا بصحى على صوت الرصاص في المخيم، بس دايما أنا لما أصحى من النوم بروح دايما أول إشي على الفيسبوك على صفحة الأخبار في المخيم، لأنه بكون خايف ماخدين حدا من عيلتي أو أي حدا يعني بعرف.
اطفي الصورة.
I'm doing my work.
من فضلك اطفي الصورة.
I'm doing my work.
اسمع
Okay.
اسمع. كان.
Yeah, I'll be here.
كان بفريم.
Okay, I'm here.
أيوة.
أنا اسمي شهد عويس، عمري 11 سنة، ساكنة في مخيم عايدة، بلد الأصلي علار. أكثر إشي بحبه في المخيم إني أنا بكون هيك يعني متمسكة لساتني بأرضي، وإني مثلا يعني لساتني بدافع عنها بطريقتي أنا، لأني مقدرش أقاوم في طريقة ثانية. وكمان بحب كثير إنه إحنا كلنا كعيلة واحدة في المخيم. وأنا كمان متطوعة في مركز لاجئ. بحب أروح على الحديقة تقريبا كل يوم عشان أنا بشوف صحباتي وبلعب هناك وبنبسط، لأنه هذاك المكان الوحيد اللي إحنا بنلعب فيه بكل المخيم. وأنا مشتركة في وحدة الموسيقى في المركز، وبعزف على آلة القانون. بحب كثير أعزف على هاي الآلة لأنه صوتها بيشعرني إني بكون مبسوطة دايما لما أعزف عليها. كثير أحيان دايما بكون جاي على المركز بكون في طخ دايما تقريبا بشكل يومي. وبس لما أنا أجي أمي بتكون كثير خايفة علي لأنه بكون في مواجهات أول إشي. تاني إشي لما أنا أجي كثير في حصص بتروح عني بسبب هاي الأشياء، لأنه أول شي بكون في صوت كثير مزعج. تاني إشي أنا مش دايما بقدر أدخل على المركز لأنه بكون الجيش يعني داخلين في المخيم. وإنه أنا كمان يعني بشوفش كثير يعني ما بجي كثير على المركز عشان هاي السبب. وبكونوا الأولاد دايما تحت يعني بالشارع، والجيش بيكونوا محاصرهم بضربوا غاز كثير كمان على المخيم. كان وقتيتها انه ضربوا الغاز والغاز عبى كثير المركز، واحنا كلنا انحشرنا في غرفة واحدة وقتيتها. وكمان في المركز حاولوا انهم كثير يساعدونا عشان نطلع، بس ما كناش قادرين نطلع عشان الغاز. وكانوا بدهم يدخلوا وياخدوا الأولاد اللي كانوا في المركز، بس الطاقم اللي في المركز منعوهم. وكانوا يعني انهم حتى كانوا انهم هاي انهم يضربوا او يطخوا لما كانوا طالعين. وانا كنت خايفة كثير عشان الأولاد وعشان انا كمان. انا حاب اخدكم هالحين في المخيم جولة عشان اورجيكم احنا كيف حياتنا اليومية، واورجيكم كمان بعض المواقع اللي كثير تتضرر من الاحتلال، وانه كثير ضخ فيها اولاد وكبار وصغار ومن هيك. من المشاكل اللي بنعاني منها في المخيم مشكلة المي، وخاصة بالصيف بتقطع المي أسبوعين أو 3 أسابيع لحد ما يعطونا مي. عشان هيك على كل بيوت المخيم في عندهم خزانات للمي. هاي صور بعض الأسرى المحكومين مدى الحياة. تقريبا في الانتفاضة الثانية أكثر من 500 شخص اعتقل، غالبيتهم تتراوح أعمارهم بين 14 و 15 سنة. هاي المدرسة معظم الأجيال القديمة والجديدة درسوا فيها، وهي تابعة لوكالة الغوث. أكثر من مرة انطق عليها من الجيش غاز ورصاص، وكان في إصابات من طلاب المدرسة. الفترة الأخيرة انطخ كثير غاز على بيوت المخيم من دون سبب، لدرجة إنه في كثير ناس سكرت الشبابيك بالخشب لأنه الجيش بطخ الغاز بشكل مباشر على البيوت. في 2014 استشهدت نهى قطامش من الغاز، و2015 ضربوا الغاز علينا وإحنا بنلعب بالحديقة من دون أي سبب، وهاي الحديقة المكان الوحيد اللي بنقدر نلعب فيه بالمخيم. مش بس بيستخدموا الغاز، كمان استخدموا مية المجاري اللي كلها مواد كيماوية برشوها على البيوت وبتضل ريحتها لفترة طويلة. 2015 طخوا صديقنا عبد الرحمن، كان واقف هون بالضبط. طخوا الناس من دون سبب من هذاك البرج.
ربنا اختار ربنا كرم خليك تعال خليها مع صدرها
خلي القطة كلنا
يا حبيبي يما يا حبيبي يلا ينتكب مني يلا ينتكب مني ربي حبيبي
اغمنون لشامة فوق لشامة 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 ليك مشى ليك لشامة ليك لشامة
حتى المكان اللي باجي ألعب فيه بحسه مش آمن، لأنه الجيش دائما متواجد فيه. ونفسي أكون زي باقي أطفال العالم، أشعر بالحماية والأمان بس ليوم واحد. وحابة إنه نفسي تتحرر فلسطين وأرجع على قريتي الأصلية، أبطل أسكن في المخيم.
That's a pretty powerful video. It'd be horrible to live like that. One of the things that I did with, I came over a couple days early with a few other people. We went down to Hebron and met Ahmed Kazmath, who is a UN representative for displaced persons. He also heads an organization called the Hebron International Resource Network, which builds and improves schools and communities in the Hebron area predominantly. Them pick up school supplies at a local store. We took them up to this school for that. We also visited a new school that was built. It's again, these are funded by various NGOs, non-government organizations. And this was a school that we were also providing materials for. However, on the first day of school, the night before the first day of school, Israel destroyed the schools that you were just looking at. They were built without permits. So the kids showed up for the first day of school, and this is what they found. And they managed to find some chairs and a shade shelter, and that's where they met. That's where the kids went to school. This was a shock to us because we had just been there, and I just couldn't believe it. One of the things that we enjoyed. This is a small Bedouin village that we visited, and no matter how poor the village, hot tea is always served. It's a hospitality of guests, is an Arab tradition that is throughout the Middle East. But this is a little small Bedouin village we visited. You can see they don't have much. This is their tent shelter, and people sleep in here at night. But they provided, everybody, this little kid came and gave us all hot tea, and we had a nice little meeting with them. But it was pretty amazing. One of the other things that, again, places that are built without building permits, in this case, this is a water tank that was provided by, I think, by the Hebron International Resource Network for a small Bedouin village. And apparently that was not permitted. So there's the Israeli guys taking it away. So no more water for Yule. So this happened about a week and a half ago. These are burning hay bales. And this, again, as you can see, according to eyewitnesses, there's some settlers from a newly established outpost snuck in the community and set fire to these hay bales. It's a drought year. There's he's buying hay to feed his sheep and goats, and because the grazing fields don't have any plants. So he bought 82 bales for $9,500, and half of it burned. Half of it was burned. So this was really in South Hebron Hills. The biggest problem is settler violence. It's pretty sad. So what do we do? How can we do something? It's this little note that the Israel's policy seems to be to make life very difficult for Palestinians so that they will leave. They don't care where they go as long as they leave. If the separation wall, that barrier you saw that surrounds much of the West Bank, if that became the border of a Palestinian state, some settlements that are outside of that wall would have to be abandoned, and that's certainly not going to happen. But in all, Palestinians try to make the best of a very bad situation. So there's a couple of things that we can do. I want to just play a quick Quaker Speak video.
What I knew growing up as a Quaker is that we took risks, that Mary Dyer went back to the Boston Common, that John Woolman went and talked to people about where they purchased their clothing. There were Quakers that helped with the Underground Railroad, et cetera, people who would even take personal risk to stand up for the truth as they saw it.
I visited Israel many, many times in my life, going back to when I was a kid. And I would always go on the hermetically sealed trip. In other words, I would go to the Jewish parts of Israel. And it wasn't until later as an adult that I literally crossed the line and spent time in the West Bank. I realized that we really have in this tiny little land two radically different universes. When you're in Tel Aviv, you can be sipping cappuccino, by the beach in a cafe, and literally just a few kilometers to your south is the Gaza Strip, which is one of the most hellish places to live on earth.
people are only concerned about living their days, about the basic things of life. For example, getting electricity, which they get only they get 6 hours a day, getting water, clean water, getting jobs. You have skyrocketing rates of unemployment, around 60% or even more people are unemployed, especially youth. So youth don't see that there is a future even in Gaza.
If they stop my father's car in Ramallah and he shows them his ID and it's blue, its color is blue, and my sister is in the car with him and she shows them her green ID, West Bank ID, it means that he has to pay a little bit more than $1,500 and his car is taken away from him for 3 months. It's illegal that he drives his daughter around in his car.
When I went to Erez checkpoint, in order to cross to present-day Israel, I was expecting that I will see Israeli soldiers face-to-face, because I have never been in all my life in direct contact with an Israeli soldiers. But to my astonishment, when I arrived there, it was like watching a science fiction movie, because everything there it was with signs, with colored lights. And then I saw an Israeli soldier who is sitting behind her desk behind a glass window. So she asked me to take off all my clothes, and I was like completely surprised. I said, why? She said, just like this. Take off your clothes and put them in the machine. So I did, but then after I got out, I kept crying, because I felt that, again, I have been humiliated. It's not enough for them to impose the siege. It wasn't enough for them to launch 3 massive attacks. Still, they keep humiliating us.
My first involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was on an Earlham College study abroad program in 1982. And since then, I've been committed to this issue. Oftentimes people ask me, how can you do this work for so long? I think, well, how can I not work on it? How can I, with the knowledge that I have and the experiences that I've had over all these many decades, how can I not work on it? Why should I have the luxury of stopping when all these people, these young people, old people, who live under such hardship, they're not giving up. I don't feel I have the luxury of despair.
As American people of faith, we need to speak our conscience, and we need to find the courage of our convictions. And if we believe in values such as equality for all, regardless of our race or religion or ethnic background, then in this land that is so sacred to so many people, not only Jews, Christians and Muslims, we need to find the courage of our convictions to call for justice. My conscience tells me, and my religious faith tells me, that when you see oppression going on, you call out the oppressor and you stand with the oppressed.
Because we are working on the right to freedom of movement, we said, okay, we want to determine the companies that are complicit in violating our right to freedom of movement. We decided to choose HP because HP is complicit in settlement activities, and they provide surveillance equipment and technology for the separation wall. They provide technology to surveillance technology to Israeli prisons.
Not because I hate Israel as Israel, but because I hate the oppressive system of Israel. And not because I want to destroy the Israelis or the Jews, but because I want this apartheid system of discriminatory policies to be ended. So I'm asking the American citizens to come in solidarity with our struggle with the Palestinians, and to say no more to what is Israel is doing.
We look at all the social movements that Quakers have been active in, and we're proud that we were on the right side of history. And I want the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to be in that narrative. I want us to feel that it is the continuum. We're calling for nonviolent means to end the Israeli occupation. We have a vision of Israelis and Palestinians living together in equality. We want historical injustices to be addressed. I want that to be seen not as an aberration, but a continuum of this history. And for Quakers to feel that that's exactly where we need to be.
So other resources. American Friends Service Committee does a lot of good work in Israel and Palestine, and in fact, I've met one of the people that's doing that. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Tell me, like, why did Hamas have rockets to begin with? There should be a blockade around Gaza.
Well, there is a blockade around Gaza. They bring in they bring in armaments, etc., through tunnels on the Egyptian border. And again, they see it as being defensive. They have no defense against Israeli airstrikes and so forth. That's their feeling is that, you know, we cannot allow this occupation to go unchallenged.
I would just think Israel would have the ability to go into South Gaza and dig up the tunnels, but they decide not to do it.
They don't go in. They bomb them. Part of what they were doing in the most recent thing after they destroyed buildings was they were going after the tunnels that there's tunnels that lead into Israel, then there's tunnels that lead into Egypt, and most of the rockets, in fact, the rockets are all stored in tunnels, so that kind of protect them. I would not validate what the Gazans are doing, what Hamas is doing. They're the only way that Palestinians feel that they can fight back against the oppressor. So I don't see it as being helpful, especially when they're firing rockets in Jerusalem, which they had not done up until now. They've been shelling small villages, small Israeli villages that border Gaza. Gaza used to be all Israeli. It was full of settlements, and Israel decided that they would abandon it and give it to the Palestinians that were living there. They didn't want to live there. The Israelis didn't want to live in Gaza anymore, so they basically destroyed all the settlements and relocated all the people that were living in settlements to other settlements. But no, I can understand why they do it. I do not. It's a shame that there's not other ways that they can resist the occupation and the violence that was being visited against the Palestinians on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I think that was that was what really triggered this whole thing. Other questions?
Mike, I think over the years, we always heard about the two-state solution. You know, that's almost a phrase we always heard. What are your thoughts on that? And what is the major stumbling block to that happening?
Major stumbling block.
It's real estate, I guess.
Real estate, yeah. Jimmy Buffett says it's all about real estate. The settlements that riddle the West Bank make a two-state solution. Well, what would it be? Gaza? You know, is that the state? No, there's just not with the settlements that are and they were put there purposely. You know, there's just not a way that you're going to find contiguous land that Palestinians could call home. It's not. It wouldn't be on the West Bank because I say the West Bank is just riddled with settlements and a couple 100,000 settlers, most of whom, by the way, are not violent. There's a small group of settlers that are violent, but most of the settlers that live on the West Bank are not violent. And I don't want to make it sound like everybody is. You can't paint a broad brush or make stereotypes of people, because everybody, you know, there's all kinds of people that make up this thing. So it's the danger is stereotyping. Palestinians, Israelis, you know, that's the whole bit. So that's not helpful.
Mike, the rockets that we just mentioned, you said are coming in through Egypt, through the ability to come from the other Arab nations or from Arab nations on the far side of the border that doesn't.
I would assume that's the source of the rockets, that somebody is decided that it's to their best interest to arm the Gazans so that they can. You know, I don't know. The source of them, I don't know. There's arms dealers everywhere in the Middle East, so there's not. I wouldn't say it's a nation state that's doing it. It's probably arms dealers that they're selling arms. How they get in through Israel or through Egypt, that's another story.
I guess I would follow that with a question based on the fact that, as I understand it, Israel is the only real democracy in that entire area. And how, okay, if Israel just pulled out at this point, not that just stopped harassing, stopped doing whatever they're doing, etc., how would it impact the only democracy that exists? And how would the rest of the nations in the Middle East possibly utilize that against, would it solve anything is what I'm saying? Or would it just allow non-democracies to advance in that area?
Well, one thing that's been going on is that the U.S. has encouraged the nations of the Middle East to drop their I wouldn't say hatred, drop their opposition to Israel, and they've done it by you know, the only thing that the U.S. knows how to do. They spent money. They you know, give them airplanes and fighter planes and that sort of thing, and basically bribe them to reestablish relations with Israel. Now you can argue about the way that they do it, but the fact that these nations are in fact establishing relations with Israel is a good thing.
Okay.
I think it's a very good thing. And
It's a positive step.
anything you can do to diffuse tensions in the Middle East is a good thing. So, I'll say one thing for the Trump administration: they figured out that the way to solve this problem is to bribe other nations with money, and they have, or the American taxpayers have. So it's not a bad thing. I mean, Israel looks at all these other things and say, hey, it's us against the world, and now it's not necessarily them against the world. I think the only outlier that's still a problem is Iran is still the big problem over there. But that has nothing. That doesn't really apply to the Israeli-Palestinian problem. That applies to Israel and Iran. And so Israel is carrying out covert military operations against Iranian resources and so forth. So that's a problem. But the rest of the other ones, they're working on it. So.
Hey, Mike, I don't know personally because I've never been there, but I have quite a few Jewish friends that have been to Israel, and actually a few that have, grown up with Netanyahu when he lived in Philadelphia. And the rest of Israel, or most of the rest of Israel, has peace with Arabs and Jews everywhere. And what I've been hearing from people that know more than I do, that have been there visiting numerous times, that the politics of Hamas and the politics of the regime now in Israel make it difficult for Israel to work on any peace process here. I mean, I like I said, I don't know personally, but it seems like politically right now, for who's in power, they don't want peace.
Well, there are Palestinians who live in Israel. There is an Arab party in the Knesset, and they're part of the coalition that basically ended Netanyahu's reign, and so they don't have a lot of rights, but they do have a voice in the Knesset, some small amount. I think the issue that I look at is this whole West Bank thing, and the fact that it is an armed military occupation of the West Bank. And if Israel wants peace, they've got to figure out a way to coexist with the Palestinians who live in the West Bank. And I don't see, from what I know, and again, I know what I read in the media and so forth, I don't see that happening. But that, if there's going to be peace, there has to be an end to the armed occupation of the West Bank and more of a civilian. If you want to have civilian control, that's fine. But this armed occupation does nothing but trigger Palestinians to react to it, because it's like you living with the state police in your backyard telling you what you can do.
Mike, is there any concerted effort to create more of a community policing mentality rather than a militarized armed response? I mean, I know there are tons of peace groups, but I just wondered if any of their actions are sort of following what's happening in the United States with the push towards changing police culture.
Hmm. Yeah, it's changing culture is a problem.
Especially militarized culture.
Everybody to do it.
Is there any group in the West Bank or in or Gaza which would be advocating sort of the things that happened in the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s in America, that would have peaceful, non-violent demonstrations, even when there's great violence against them, as in, say, Selma? But those kinds of things have great power to them. But boy, it takes a lot of nerve and a lot of commitment to do that.
Well, my experience, or from what I know, there is no such thing as a nonviolent protest in the West Bank by Palestinians. They may come in with the idea that they're going to be nonviolent and they're going to be protesting, and then the armed occupation says, no, you cannot do that. So we will either arrest you or we'll tear gas you and break this up, because we don't like to see great big groups of Palestinians protesting anything. So yeah, there are a lot of peace organizations, as I said, in Israel and in Palestine that are actively working for peace. It's difficult to do, but they do. So there's 2 or 3 organizations that I'm aware of that are in fact doing that. But what they also do is document the occupation and try to shine a light on it, so that so the world sees what's going on. They're not going to do it. They need support from the international community to get anything done.
So Mike, you talked before about not being allowed to go to Ramallah. Tell me about that again. You could go after all to Hebron or Bethlehem.
No, you can go to Ramallah. You just have to go through a checkpoint. There are various checkpoints around where I don't know what the purpose is, but it seems to be to make sure that people get harassed. As I say, it's like going through TSA checkpoints. Get off your airplane, go through a checkpoint, get back on again. They get on the bus, get off the bus. But the place that if you live on the West Bank, you cannot go to Gaza. And if you live in Gaza, you can't go to the West Bank. You can't.
And also, if you live on the West Bank, you can't go into Israel, right?
Unless you have a work permit.
Right.
There are Israelis or Palestinians that go every day, go through checkpoints and go to work in Israel.
Okay, but they do allow you as an American to go to Ramallah to see that.
You can, as an American, can go anywhere except Gaza.
Right.
It takes a lot of red tape if you're going to go to Gaza, because they don't want you there. Israel does not want internationals there, but there are internationals there. But they're and I suppose you probably come in through Egypt, but I'm not sure. But yeah, you can travel. Americans can travel anywhere. Or internationals, I should say, can go anywhere. They can go to Israel, they go to Palestine, they go everywhere. So.
And yet, I understand that you're probably by now on a sort of a hit list, as it were, by the Israeli government, and you would probably not be allowed into the country at this point.
Well, that's a possibility, because one of the things that we did a month or more before we went on our trip, we scrubbed our social media. We came off all social media and deleted accounts and so forth, so that, because they look at it, they say, okay, let's look at your Facebook page and what you've been saying. Have you said anything about boycotting Israeli products or anything like that? you're on the next plane out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Or you may not even be allowed to get on the plane to go there. So that's they'll stop you from even coming into the airport. Oh, it's interesting.
I kind of hesitate to refer to it as a democratic country without putting a pretty big asterisk by it.
Well, it's sort of like it is a democratic country. I mean, they just had an election and threw Netanyahu out there. There is hope. But I'm not sure that the regime that came in is going to be any better, except that it has a lot of, it's got a very, very broad, including Palestinian party as part of it. So the hope is that they can be a moderating force on the prime minister that was not there during Netanyahu's reign.
Yes. Okay. Well, there's a lesson to be learned there that voting really does count.
Yeah.
We need that lesson here sometimes.
No, the Palestinian Authority has no authority on Gaza, right? They're
Correct.
completely separated now, right?
Yeah, they have
the West Bank and Gaza.
They have the Palestinian Authority has authority in parts of the West Bank, not in East Jerusalem, but and not in Gaza. Although, as I say, Hamas, who pretty much runs Gaza, is in the Palestinian Authority. So,
oh, it is though.
Yeah, it is. It is a member. And again, the reason they probably aren't going to have elections is because they would probably kick out the 85-year-old and bring in somebody from Hamas, and that's that would be difficult.
And I suppose Saudi Arabia does not want Hamas in power. I don't know.
I don't know. I really don't. I really don't. Nobody knows what Saudi Arabia wants. So
yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Not everybody's happy with Israel, but more people are happier with it now than they used to be. So, and
Mike,
again,
did you
Go ahead.
visit the Armenian section, and do they have a vibrant voice in these matters, or do they just kind of lie low?
I never met any Armenians over there, but their section has some really nice restaurants in it. So we go over there.
Right.
And I don't think they have they're interested in keeping their heads down and keeping themselves together. So, but again, I don't know that I met any Armenians. I probably did because they had very nice restaurants. And I don't know. Certainly the Christians have they have their own set of issues over there as well. But I mean, they're living through this too.
It's when Paul referred to our civil rights struggle here, it just does make you think. And the woman in the Quaker Speak talking about she's been doing it from 1982 and is still working at it. But I think, how can it possibly resolve itself if Israel doesn't want peace and yet Palestinians don't have access to even water, electricity, the same, medical care, markets, just the basics. It just seems like
the limits on electricity are apply to Gaza. The rest of the West Bank has power. They don't have a lot of water, but they do have power. And again, in Gaza, Israel controls broadband, the speed or not the speed of broadband, the flow of electricity, the fuel oil, that sort of thing. All is controlled by Israel. thank you for all these great questions. I think we'd like to probably move into meeting for worship at some point.
I think that would be appropriate, yes.
Take a break and
Thanks, Mike. It was really helpful.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.